Welcome to another story on Cheating Tales Lab. We're so happy to have you here, and today's story is one we think you'll really enjoy. So without further ado, let's begin. Hector Mansfield's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck as he turned onto the gravel driveway leading to his farmhouse. The sun hung high in the sky, unusual for his return from the farmer's market. He'd wrapped up early, hoping to surprise Scarlett with lunch from her favorite deli in town. As he pulled up to the house, something caught his eye. A brown package sat on the porch, addressed to his wife. Hector paused, key in hand. Scarlett never ordered anything online. She preferred browsing the local shops, supporting their neighbors' businesses. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something was off. He grabbed the package along with his market cooler and headed inside. The house was quiet, Scarlett likely out running errands. Hector set the cooler on the kitchen counter, but kept hold of the package. His farmer's instincts, honed by years of reading subtle signs in crops and weather, were screaming at him. Without really thinking about it, he found himself peeling back the tape. Inside was tissue paper, wrapped around something silky and red. As Hector lifted it out, a small card fluttered to the floor. His heart pounding, he bent to retrieve it. The handwriting was unfamiliar masculine. "Wear the gift I sent for our next wild night. Ditch your loser husband ASAP. D." Hector's world tilted on its axis. The red fabric in his hand suddenly felt like it was burning his skin. He let it fall to the counter, revealing itself to be a lacy dress, the kind of dress Scarlett would never wear for him. His mind raced, thoughts crashing into each other like a hailstorm on a tin roof. How long had this been going on? Who was D? And why hadn't he seen this coming? Hector's hand shook as he poured himself a glass of water, trying to steady his nerves. He needed to think. To plan. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered his thoughts. Scarlett was home. In a panic, Hector shoved the dress and note back into the package, hiding it in the pantry. He grabbed a dish towel, wiping his sweaty palms as he heard the front door open. "Hector, you're home early," Scarlett called out, her voice carrying a hint of surprise and was that nervousness? "Yeah, slow day at the market," he replied, amazed at how normal his voice sounded. "Thought I'd come home for lunch." Scarlett appeared in the kitchen doorway, her shoulder-length brown hair slightly windswept. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's nice, honey. I was just out running some errands." Hector nodded, watching her closely. She moved to the fridge, her back to him as she rummaged for something. That's when he heard it, the muffled sound of her phone vibrating in her pocket. Scarlett tensed just for a moment before casually saying, "Oh, I should take this. It's probably about Sarah's birthday party next week." She stepped out onto the back porch, closing the door behind her. Hector moved closer, straining to hear. "Can't talk now," Scarlett's voice drifted through the door. "He's home early." "No, don't worry. I'll figure something out." "Yes, I got it. It's perfect." "I know, I can't wait either." Hector's fists clenched at his sides. The lies flowed so easily from her lips. How long had she been perfecting this act? As Scarlett's footsteps approached the door, Hector quickly moved back to the counter, pretending to unpack his market haul. "Sorry about that," Scarlett said breezily as she re-entered. "You know how Sarah gets about planning these things." Hector nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was already racing, formulating a plan. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. First, he needed more information. He needed to know exactly what he was up against. "I'm actually not feeling great," he lied, matching her casualness. "Think I might lie down for a bit." Scarlett's brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. "Oh no, do you want me to make you some soup?" "No thanks. I just need some rest." As he climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Hector's mind whirled with questions and plans. One thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. Hector lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind a tumultuous sea of emotions. Anger, betrayal, and a deep, gnawing pain fought for dominance. But beneath it all, a cold determination was taking root. He reached for his laptop, opening it with purpose. If Scarlett thought she could play him for a fool, she was in for a rude awakening. Hector might be just a simple farmer in her eyes, but he was far from stupid. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he delved into the depths of the internet, searching for any information he could find on this mysterious D. It didn't take long for him to stumble upon a likely candidate, Douglas Cunningham, a wealthy real estate developer known for his aggressive business tactics and playboy lifestyle. Hector's eyes narrowed as he scrolled through articles and social media posts. Douglas was everything Hector wasn't: rich, suave, and utterly ruthless. But as he dug deeper, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Local forums were buzzing with rumors about Douglas's latest project, a massive development that threatened to swallow up several small farms in the area, Hector's farm included. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture that made Hector's blood run cold. This wasn't just about Scarlett's infidelity. This was about his land, his livelihood, his entire way of life. Hector leaned back, his mind racing. He needed more information, and he needed allies. Two names immediately sprang to mind: Tom Grayson and Lydia Chin. Tom had been Hector's best friend since childhood, and now served as the town's sheriff. If anyone could help him navigate the legal minefield he was about to enter, it was Tom. Lydia, on the other hand, was a fierce investigative journalist for the local paper. She had a nose for corruption and tenacity of a bulldog when it came to exposing the truth. Hector reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over Tom's number. But before he could make the call, he heard Scarlett's footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, he closed the laptop and set it aside, feigning sleep as the bedroom door creaked open. "Hector." Scarlett's voice was soft, tinged with what sounded like genuine concern. "Are you feeling any better?" He mumbled something noncommittal, keeping his eyes closed. He felt the bed dip as she sat beside him, her hand cool against his forehead. "You don't feel warm," she mused. "Maybe it's just stress. You've been working so hard lately." Hector fought to keep his breathing steady, resisting the urge to flinch away from her touch. How could she act so caring while betraying him behind his back? "I'm heading out to pick up some groceries," Scarlett continued. "Do you need anything?" "No," Hector managed, his voice rough. "I'm fine." He felt her hesitate for a moment before standing. "All right, get some rest. I'll be back soon." As soon as he heard the front door close and Scarlett's car pull out of the driveway, Hector was up and moving. He had work to do, and not much time to do it. First, he called Tom, keeping his voice low despite the empty house. "Tom, it's Hector. I need your help with something. Discreet. Can you meet me at the old fishing spot in an hour?" Next, he dialed Lydia's number. "Lydia, it's Hector Mansfield. I've got a story you might be interested in. It's about Douglas Cunningham and his new development project." With the wheels set in motion, Hector turned his attention to the package hidden in the pantry. He retrieved it, studying the lacy red dress with a mixture of disgust and determination. An idea began to form in his mind. If Scarlett and Douglas wanted to play dirty, he'd show them just how dirty a farmer could get. The bell above the door of Hank's General Store jingled as Hector stepped inside. Old Hank looked up from his crossword puzzle, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Hector Mansfield, twice in one day. What brings you back so soon?" Hector forced a smile, trying to appear casual. "Forgot to pick up a few things earlier." "Say, Hank, you wouldn't happen to have any itching powder, would you?" Hank's bushy eyebrows shot up even higher. "Itching powder? What in tarnation do you need that for?" "Oh, just a harmless prank on the guys down at the feed store," Hector lied smoothly. "You know how it is." Hank chuckled, shaking his head. "Never took you for the pranking type, Hector. But who am I to judge? It's in the back, next to the fake dog poop and whoopee cushions." Hector nodded his thanks and made his way to the back of the store. As he grabbed the small container of itching powder, his eyes fell on a display of tiny GPS trackers, perfect for keeping track of keys, wallets, or cheating spouses. He added one to his basket, along with a small, discreet camera. At Hank's questioning look, Hector muttered something about wanting to catch the raccoons that had been raiding his compost pile. Back at home, Hector worked quickly and methodically. He carefully laced the red dress with itching powder, making sure to concentrate on the areas that would cause the most discomfort. Then he repackaged everything exactly as it had arrived, erasing any evidence of his tampering. Next, he installed the GPS tracker in Scarlett's car, hiding it beneath the driver's seat where she'd never think to look. The camera went up near their driveway, angled to catch any comings and goings. As he worked, Hector's mind drifted back to his earlier meetings with Tom and Lydia. Tom had been skeptical at first, but the evidence Hector presented had quickly convinced him of the seriousness of the situation. They'd agreed to keep things quiet for now, gathering more information before making any moves. Lydia, on the other hand, had been practically salivating at the prospect of exposing Douglas Cunningham's corrupt practices. She'd promised to dig into his business dealings and land acquisitions, looking for any sign of foul play. The sound of Scarlett's car pulling into the driveway snapped Hector back to the present. He quickly finished what he was doing and headed inside, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Scarlett entered, arms laden with groceries. "Feeling any better?" she asked, her voice laced with what seemed like genuine concern. Hector nodded, forcing a smile. "Much thanks. Here, let me help you with those." As they unpacked the groceries together, Hector casually mentioned, "Oh, a package came for you earlier. I put it by the front door." Scarlett's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something, excitement, fear, passing across her face. "Oh, I wasn't expecting anything." Hector shrugged, turning away to hide the anger burning in his eyes. "Must be a surprise, then." Later that evening, as they sat watching TV, Hector noticed Scarlett eyeing the package nervously. He pretended not to notice, instead announcing, "By the way, I've been thinking about that new development project. The one Douglas Cunningham is working on?" Scarlett's head snapped around, her eyes wide. "What about it?" "Well, I was thinking maybe we should consider their offer. Might be a good opportunity for us." The relief on Scarlett's face was palpable. "Oh, I thought you were dead set against selling the farm." Hector shrugged, playing his part to perfection. "Times change. Maybe it's time we did too. I'm going to start attending those town meetings, see what it's all about." Scarlett nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "That sounds like a good idea, honey." As Hector turned back to the TV, he allowed himself a smile of his own. The trap was set. Now all he had to do was wait for them to spring it. A week had passed since Hector had handed Scarlett the package containing the lacy red dress laced with itching powder. Each day had been an excruciating exercise in restraint, watching his wife's poorly concealed excitement grow as the days ticked by. Now, on a crisp Saturday morning, Hector sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper while covertly observing Scarlett's frantic preparations. "I'm heading out now, honey," Scarlett called, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. "Sarah's birthday party, remember? I might be back late, so don't wait up." Hector grunted in acknowledgement, not trusting himself to speak. He watched as Scarlett hurried out the door, a large tote bag slung over her shoulder. The red dress was undoubtedly tucked away inside, along with whatever lies she'd prepared to cover her tracks. As soon as Scarlett's car disappeared down the driveway, Hector sprang into action. He grabbed his own set of keys and a small duffel bag containing surveillance equipment. His hands shook slightly as he started his truck, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The GPS tracker he'd installed in Scarlett's car blinked steadily on his phone screen, leading him unerringly through the winding country roads. Hector's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as the tracker came to a stop at the Bluebird Motel, a seedy establishment on the outskirts of town. "Classy, Scarlett," Hector muttered, pulling into a secluded spot with a clear view of the motel's parking lot. He watched as Scarlett emerged from her car, glancing furtively around before hurrying to room 12. Hector's jaw clenched as he set up his camera, focusing on the door to room 12. The waiting game began, each minute stretching into an eternity. He didn't have to wait long. A sleek black Audi pulled into the lot, and out stepped Douglas Cunningham, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit. Hector zoomed in, capturing clear footage of Douglas knocking on the door to room 12 and being quickly ushered inside by Scarlett. Hector's stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain focused. This wasn't about the pain of betrayal anymore. This was about justice, about protecting his land and his community from the machinations of people like Douglas Cunningham. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Hector kept the camera rolling, documenting the passage of time. Then suddenly, all hell broke loose. The door to room 12 burst open, and Scarlett exploded out, wearing the red dress and nothing else. She was screaming and scratching at her skin, her face contorted in agony. Douglas followed close behind, his shirt unbuttoned and his hair disheveled, looking utterly bewildered. "What the hell is happening?" Douglas shouted, trying to grab Scarlett's flailing arms. "Scarlett, what's wrong?" "It burns," Scarlett shrieked, her nails leaving angry red welts on her skin as she clawed at the dress. "Get it off me." "Oh, God, it's everywhere." Hector zoomed in, capturing every detail of the unfolding chaos. Other motel guests were emerging from their rooms, gawking at the spectacle. "Calm down," Douglas hissed, trying to maintain some semblance of control. People are watching. Think of the project, damn it. Fuck your project. Scarlett spat, tears streaming down her face. I can't take this anymore. The lies, the sneaking around, trying to manipulate Hector into selling the farm. I'm done. Hector's eyebrows shot up. He hadn't expected such a clear confession, but he wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. As motel staff rushed out, phones in hand to call for an ambulance, Hector quietly packed up his equipment. He had what he needed. More than he'd hoped for, in fact. As he drove away, leaving the chaos behind him, a smile played on his lips. The real fireworks were just beginning. Sheriff Tom Grayson stared at his computer screen, his brow furrowed in disbelief. The video footage Hector had anonymously sent him was damning, to say the least. He'd known Hector since they were kids, and while he'd initially been skeptical of his friend's claims, this evidence was impossible to ignore. Jesus Christ, Tom muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. He picked up his phone, dialing a familiar number. Chief, we've got a situation. You're going to want to see this. Across town, in the bustling newsroom of the local paper, Lydia Chen's eyes gleamed with the fervor of a predator that had just caught the scent of blood. The anonymous tip had led her to a goldmine of information, and now with the video footage corroborating everything, she knew she had the story of a lifetime on her hands. Johnson, she barked at a nearby in turn. Give me everything we have on Douglas Cunningham's land deals for the past 5 years. And somebody find out which hospital Scarlett Mansfield was taken to. As Lydia's team scrambled to action, the story was already breaking across multiple platforms. Local news stations interrupted their regular programming with breaking news alerts, and social media was ablaze with speculation and outrage. At Oakville General Hospital, Scarlett Mansfield lay in a bed, her skin still red and inflamed from her allergic reaction to the itching powder. A nurse had just confiscated her phone, but not before Scarlett had seen the notifications flooding in. Her fate was public knowledge now, splashed across every local news outlet. Scarlett closed her eyes, hot tears of shame and regret sliding down her cheeks. How had it all gone so wrong? She'd only wanted a little excitement, a taste of the glamorous life Douglas had promised. Now her marriage was in tatters, her reputation ruined, and the entire town knew her as nothing more than a cheating wife who tried to sell out her husband's legacy. Meanwhile, in his plush office overlooking the town, Douglas Cunningham was in full damage control mode. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke, and his lawyer was already drafting statements and exploring legal options. I don't care what it takes, Douglas snarled into his phone. Shut this down. Now. As he hung up, his eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk. It showed him shaking hands with the mayor at a charity gala, both men grinning widely. Douglas's lip curled in disgust. He'd worked too hard, come too far, to let some backwater farmer and his cheating wife ruin everything. A plan began to form in his mind. If money couldn't make this go away, maybe a little pressure on the right people could. His eyes narrowed as he picked up his phone again, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for, Hector Mansfield. Across town, in the modest farmhouse that had become the eye of this growing storm, Hector sat at his kitchen table, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. He'd known this moment would come, had planned for it meticulously, but the reality of it all was still overwhelming. The house phone rang, startling him out of his reverie. Hector stared at it for a moment, then slowly reached out to answer. Mansfield residence, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. Mr. Mansfield came a smooth, cultured voice that Hector instantly recognized as belonging to Douglas Cunningham. I think it's time you and I had a chat. I have a proposition for you. Hector's grip tightened on the phone. This was it. The moment when all his planning, all his pain, would either pay off or crumble to dust. I'm listening, Hector replied, his voice betraying nothing of the storm raging inside him. As Douglas began to speak, laying out a proposal that reeked of desperation and bribery, Hector felt a cold resolve settle over him. He would play along for now. By time for Lydia to dig deeper, for Tom to build a stronger case. The endgame was in sight, and Hector Mansfield intended to see it through to the bitter end. Outside, the first protesters were beginning to gather. Word of the environmental concerns Hector had anonymously tipped off had spread quickly, and now a small but vocal group stood at the edge of his property, waving signs and chanting slogans against Cunningham's development project. As night fell on the town, the stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. The seeds of betrayal Hector had discovered a week ago had grown into a tangled web of lies, corruption, and retribution. and at the center of it all stood a simple farmer, armed with nothing but the truth and an unshakable determination to see justice done. The farmhouse kitchen, once a place of warmth and family gatherings, now felt like a war room. Hector sat at the table, surrounded by stacks of documents, his laptop open to multiple tabs of research. The past few days had been a whirlwind of activity, with each new revelation adding fuel to the fire that threatened to consume Douglas Cunningham's empire. The sound of tires on gravel drew Hector's attention. He looked up to see Scarlett's car pulling into the driveway. His jaw clenched involuntarily. This was a confrontation he'd been dreading, but one he knew was inevitable. Scarlett entered the house hesitantly, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her actions and their consequences. "Hector," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where to start. I'm so sorry. What I did, there's no excuse." Hector regarded her coldly, his face an impassive mask. "You're right. There isn't." Scarlett flinched at his tone, but pressed on. "Please, Hector. We can work this out. I'll do anything. I love you. I never meant for any of this to happen." For a moment, Hector felt a flicker of the love he'd once held for this woman. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her betrayal, of the calculated way she conspired with Douglas to steal his land. "Love?" Hector's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Was it love when you plotted with Douglas to take my farm? When you lied to my face day after day?" Scarlett's face crumpled. "It wasn't like that. Douglas, he manipulated me. He made promises, said he could give us a better life. Us?" Hector laughed bitterly. "There is no us anymore, Scarlett." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the table to her. Scarlett's hand shook as she opened it, her eyes widening as she realized what she was holding. "Divorce papers?" she whispered, looking up at Hector in shock. Hector nodded. "I think it's best if you stay with your sister for a while. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the rest." Scarlett's plea for forgiveness dissolved into sobs, but Hector remained unmoved. As she gathered a few belongings and left, Hector felt a weight lift from his shoulders. One chapter was closing, but the real battle was just beginning. Across town, in the opulent offices of Cunningham Developments, Douglas Cunningham was facing his own reckoning. His lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Arnold Weiss, sat across from him, his expression grave. "It's bad, Douglas," Weiss said, shuffling through a stack of papers. "The bribery attempt with Mansfield was caught on tape. We've got environmental violations coming out of our ears. And now the SEC is sniffing around some of your other land deals." Douglas slammed his fist on the desk. "I don't pay you to tell me how bad it is. I pay you to fix it." Weiss leaned back, unimpressed by the display of temper. "There might be a way, but it's risky. If we can discredit Mansfield, make him look like the bad guy here, we might be able to turn public opinion." Douglas's eyes gleamed with a desperate sort of hope. "How?" "We plant some evidence. Make it look like he's been evading taxes, maybe committing a little insurance fraud on the side. It's a small town. People are quick to believe the worst about their neighbors." For a moment, Douglas hesitated. This was crossing a line, even for him. But as he thought about the empire he'd built, the power he wielded, he knew he couldn't let it all slip away because of one stubborn farmer. "Do it," he growled. As night fell, two shadowy figures crept onto Hector's property. They moved with purpose, planting falsified documents in Hector's barn and tampering with his financial records. Little did they know Hector's hidden cameras were capturing their every move. The next morning, as Hector reviewed the footage, a smile played on his lips. He'd anticipated this move, prepared for it. Now he had them exactly where he wanted them. He picked up his phone, dialing a familiar number. "Tom, it's Hector. You're going to want to see this." As Sheriff Grayson arrived to review the evidence, Lydia Chen was putting the finishing touches on her most explosive article yet. The headline blazed across her computer screen. "Cunningham caught. Developers desperate attempt TO frame local farmer backfires." The town was abuzz with the latest developments. Hector found himself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero for standing up to corporate greed and corruption. But as he stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the fields his family had tended for generations, Hector felt no triumph, only a satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The battle was far from over, but Hector Mansfield was ready. He'd weathered betrayal, faced down threats, and emerged stronger. Whatever Douglas Cunningham and his cronies threw at him next, Hector would be ready. For his land, for his community, and for the truth, he would fight to the bitter end. The Oakville County Courthouse loomed before Hector Mansfield like a monolith of justice. Its weathered stone facade had witnessed countless dramas over the years, but few as complex and far-reaching as the one about to unfold within its walls. Hector straightened his tie, a gesture that felt foreign to his calloused farmer's hands. He traded his usual flannel and work boots for a suit that hung awkwardly on his frame. But today wasn't about comfort. It was about standing tall in the face of those who tried to destroy everything he held dear. As he climbed the courthouse steps, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished brass doors. The man staring back at him looked older, harder. The past months had etched new lines around his eyes and mouth. But there was a fire in his gaze that hadn't been there before, a determination born of betrayal and honed by righteous anger. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. On one side sat Douglas Cunningham, looking less the suave businessman and more like a cornered animal. His expensive suit couldn't hide the sheen of sweat on his brow or the nervous tick in his jaw. Beside him, Scarlett, no longer Hector's wife, but a stranger wearing her face, stared straight ahead, her expression a mask of practiced indifference. Hector took his place at the plaintiff's table, nodding to his lawyer. The evidence they'd gathered lay in neat stacks before them, a paper trail of corruption, greed, and betrayal. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, Hector felt a strange calm settle over him. This was it. The moment when all the pain, all the scheming, all the sleepless nights would either pay off or crumble to dust. The first blow came swiftly. Hector's lawyer presented recordings of Douglas's clumsy attempts at bribery, his voice filling the courtroom with damning evidence. "Mr. Mansfield," Douglas's voice crackled from the speakers, "I'm prepared to make this all go away. Name your price." "Everyone has one." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Douglas sank lower in his seat, his face ashen. Next came the land deal documents, meticulously annotated to show the web of shell companies and falsified environmental reports Douglas had used to push through his development plans. As the evidence mounted, Hector watched the color drain from Douglas's face. Scarlett, for her part, seemed to shrink with each new revelation, as if trying to disappear into her chair. But the true coup de grace came from an unexpected source. Lydia Chin, the investigative journalist who'd been digging into Douglas's past, had published a series of explosive exposés. Her articles, entered into evidence, painted a damning picture of Douglas's corrupt practices stretching back years. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steely gray hair, listened to it all with an impassive expression. When the final piece of evidence had been presented, she removed her glasses and surveyed the courtroom. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, she began, her voice cutting through the tense silence, "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Hector Mansfield." A collective gasp went up from the gallery. Hector felt a weight lift from his shoulders, even as the judge continued. "Mr. Cunningham's company is hereby ordered to pay significant damages to all affected farmers, and full ownership of the Mansfield farm is to remain with Mr. Mansfield." Douglas leapt to his feet, face contorted with rage, but his lawyer quickly pulled him back down, whispering urgently in his ear. As the courtroom erupted into chaos, Hector remained still, his eyes locked on Scarlett. For a brief moment, their gazes met. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, regret, fear, before she quickly looked away. The family court proceedings that followed were almost anticlimactic. With her infidelity a matter of public record and her complicity in Douglas's schemes exposed, Scarlett was left with nothing in the divorce settlement. As Hector left the courthouse that day, the late afternoon sun warm on his face, he felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction that justice had been served, and a bone-deep weariness at the cost of it all. The battle was won, but Hector knew the war was far from over. The real work, rebuilding his life, his community, and the trust that had been shattered, was just beginning. The old barn on the edge of Hector's property had seen better days. Its red paint was faded and peeling, the roof sagged ominously in places, and the big double doors creaked in protest when opened. But today, it hummed with activity and purpose. Inside, farmers from all over the county had gathered. Men and women whose families had worked this land for generations sat on hay bales and leaned against weathered support beams. Their faces were etched with worry lines, but their eyes held a spark of hope that hadn't been there in months. Hector stood before them, acutely aware of the weight of expectation on his shoulders. He'd become something of a local hero in the wake of the trial, a David who'd taken on Goliath and won. But he knew that one victory didn't guarantee a war, and the threat of predatory developers still loomed large over their community. Friends, he began, his voice carrying easily in the hushed barn. What we've been through, what we've overcome, it's just the beginning. He outlined his plan for a cooperative, a way for small farms to band together, pooling resources and fighting as one against those who would seek to drive them from their land. We're stronger together, Hector said, his voice gaining strength. Our families have tended this soil for generations. It's more than just land. It's our heritage, our legacy. And by God, we're going to protect it. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded, backs straightened. Hector could feel the mood in the barn shifting, fear and uncertainty giving way to determination and resolve. As the meeting broke up, farmers lingered to shake Hector's hand, to offer words of support or ask questions about the cooperative. The barn buzzed with a new energy, a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. But not everyone shared in the optimism of the moment. Across town, in a small apartment that felt a world away from the farmhouse she'd once called home, Scarlett Mansfield, no, Scarlett Thompson now, she reminded herself bitterly, stared out the window at the unfamiliar street below. The trial had left her with nothing. No home, no money, no friends. The town that had once embraced her now turned its collective back, whispers and pointed looks following her whenever she ventured out. Scarlett's hand shook slightly as she raised a glass of wine to her lips. She'd made mistakes, terrible ones. But surely she didn't deserve this complete ostracization, this erasure of her entire life. A wild, desperate plan began to form in her mind. She'd go to Hector, throw herself on his mercy, beg forgiveness, promise to make amends. Surely there must be some spark of the love they'd once shared still burning in his heart. Meanwhile, in a seedy motel room on the outskirts of town, Douglas Cunningham paced like a caged animal. Financial ruin stared him in the face. His company was in shambles, lawsuits piling up faster than he could count. The empire he'd spent a lifetime building was crumbling around him, and he knew exactly who to blame. Hector Mansfield. The name burned in his mind like acid. That simple farmer, that nobody, had brought him to his knees. The rage that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. Douglas's hand closed around the neck of a half-empty whiskey bottle. With a roar of frustration, he hurled it against the wall, watching with savage satisfaction as it shattered, amber liquid and glass shards exploding outward. As he stood there, chest heaving, a cold clarity settled over him. He wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Hector Mansfield had taken everything from him. It was time to return the favor. Back at the Mansfield farm, Hector stood on his porch, looking out over the fields that stretched to the horizon. The land that had nearly been stolen from him now felt more precious than ever. He didn't notice the figure approaching until she was halfway up the drive. Scarlett. Even at a distance, he'd know that walk anywhere. Hector's jaw clenched. He'd known this moment would come eventually, but he hoped for more time. Time to steel himself against the flood of emotions her presence still stirred in him. As Scarlett drew closer, Hector could see the desperation in her eyes, the trembling of her lips as she prepared to speak. But before she could utter a word, he held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't," he said, his voice low and firm. "Whatever you came here to say, Scarlett, just don't." "Hector, please," she began, her voice breaking. "I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" Hector's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. "You betrayed everything we built together. You conspired to steal my land, my heritage. Those aren't mistakes, Scarlett. Those are choices." Tears spilled down Scarlett's cheeks, but Hector remained unmoved. The woman before him was a stranger, wearing the face of someone he'd once loved. "I'm sorry," he said softer now, "but there's nothing left for you here. It's time for you to go." As Scarlett turned and walked away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, Hector felt a chapter of his life closing definitively. It hurt, yes, but it was a clean hurt. The kind that healed, eventually. He didn't see the figure watching from the shadows of the trees that lined his property. Didn't notice the glint of hatred in Douglas Cunningham's eyes as he watched the exchange. Didn't realize that the worst was yet to come. The autumn sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fairgrounds as Oakville's first harvest festival in years got underway. The air was crisp, scented with the sweetness of apples and the earthy aroma of pumpkins. Laughter and music drifted on the breeze, a joyous soundtrack to the celebration of community and perseverance. Hector Mansfield stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as families explored the stalls laden with local produce. Children squealed with delight on hayrides, and neighbors who'd been strangers just months ago now chatted like old friends. A hand clapped him on the shoulder, startling him from his reverie. Sheriff Tom Grayson grinned at him, a paper plate piled high with pie in his other hand. "Quite a turnout, huh?" Tom said, gesturing at the bustling fairgrounds. "You should be proud, Hector. None of this would have happened without you." Hector shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would have done." Tom's expression turned serious. "No, you didn't. You stood up when it would have been easier to give in. You fought for this community when most folks would have cut and run." Before Hector could respond, a hush fell over the crowd. The mayor, a portly man with a handlebar mustache, was climbing onto a makeshift stage, tapping a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor's voice boomed out, "if I could have your attention, please. It's my great honor to introduce the man who made all this possible. The man who reminded us what it means to stand together in the face of adversity. Please welcome Hector Mansfield." The crowd erupted in applause. Hector felt his face flush as all eyes turned to him. Tom gave him a gentle push towards the stage. "Go on," he said with a wink. "Your public awaits." As Hector made his way to the stage, he caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. Lydia Chin, notepad in hand, gave him a thumbs up. The old-timers who'd initially scoffed at his cooperative now nodded in approval. Young families whose farms had been saved beamed at him with gratitude. Standing at the microphone, looking out over the sea of faces, Hector felt a swell of emotion threaten to overwhelm him. He took a deep breath, centering himself. "Folks," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I'm not much for speeches. I'm just a farmer like many of you. But what we've been through this past year, well, it's taught me some things I think are worth sharing." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've learned that integrity isn't just a word we throw around. It's a choice we make every day, especially when it's hard. I've learned that perseverance isn't about never falling down, but about getting back up every time we do." The crowd hung on his every word, the fairground silence save for Hector's voice. "But most of all, I've learned that we're stronger together than we ever could be alone. This festival, this community we're rebuilding, it's not about me. It's about all of us. About the legacy we're protecting and the future we're building for our children." As Hector finished speaking, the applause was deafening. He stepped off the stage, immediately surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. But even in this moment of triumph, Hector couldn't help but notice two conspicuous absences. On the outskirts of town, a car packed with hastily thrown together belongings pulled onto the highway. Behind the wheel, Scarlett Thompson blinked back tears as she watched Oakville disappear in her rearview mirror. The town that had once been her home now held nothing but painful memories and closed doors. She thought of Hector, imagined him surrounded by adoring townsfolk, celebrated as a hero. The bitterness that welled up inside her was tempered by a grudging respect. He'd outplayed her at every turn, revealed a strength she'd never suspected he possessed. As the now leaving Oakville sign flashed past, Scarlett allowed herself one final glance back. Then she pressed down on the accelerator, her gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead and the uncertain future that awaited her. Miles away, in the opposite direction, another car sped along the empty highway. Douglas Cunningham's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He lost everything. His company, his reputation, his future. All because of one stubborn farmer who refused to know his place. The rage that had been simmering for months now burned cold and hard in his chest. This wasn't over. He'd be back someday when Hector least expected it, and he'd make him pay for every humiliation, every loss. But for now, Douglas drove on, leaving behind the ruins of his empire and the bitter taste of defeat. Back at the festival, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Hector found a quiet moment alone. He stood at the edge of his property, looking out over the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The victory had come at a cost. His marriage, his trust in others, a piece of his innocence, all sacrificed in the name of justice and preservation. Yet as he watched the fireflies begin their nightly dance over the cornfields, Hector felt a sense of peace settle over him. The bitterness of revenge had faded, replaced by a quiet determination to channel his energy into something positive. He thought of the young farmers he'd been mentoring, eager faces soaking up generations of knowledge. He thought of the cooperative, growing stronger every day, a bulwark against future threats to their way of life. And for the first time in months, Hector allowed himself to think of the future. not just in terms of crops and seasons, but in terms of his own life. The possibility of love, of companionship, no longer seemed like a closed door. As he turned back towards the fairgrounds, towards the warmth of community and the promise of a new day, Hector Mansfield smiled. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time, eyes open, heart cautiously optimistic. The night air carried the last strains of music from the festival, a joyful melody that seemed to echo the sentiment in Hector's heart. The worst was behind them. The best, he dared to hope, was yet to come.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.